Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. I know exactly what I am. I am a worm. I do not mean that in a symbolic way. I am not calling myself weak, worthless, or disgusting. I am a real worm. I crawl through wet soil. I dig beneath roots. I push through dark earth with a body that has no arms, no legs, and no bones. I eat dirt because that is what this body was made to do. I was not always a worm. Once, I was human, just like you. It turns out reincarnation is real. Souls move from one body to another, passing through different creatures again and again. Most living things do not remember their past lives. Each new body begins with an empty mind. I am different. For reasons I still do not understand, I have carried my memories through every life I have lived. I remember being born again and again. I remember seeing the world through eyes that were not human. I remember breathing through lungs, gills, and small holes in the sides of insect bodies. I remember running, swimming, flying, crawling, hunting, hiding, and dying. I have never met another soul like mine. When I finally became human, I tried to tell people the truth. I thought someone might believe me. I thought doctors, scientists, or religious leaders might want to understand what I was. Instead, they placed me inside a facility. They said I was sick. They asked me the same questions every day. They showed me pictures of animals and watched my face. They asked me to describe places I could not possibly have visited. When I gave them details they could confirm, they stopped treating me like a patient and began treating me like a dangerous object. I learned to keep quiet. I could not tell you how long I have existed. Time is mainly a human idea. Animals do not measure their lives in years. A bird does not know the date. A fish does not care what century it is. A worm does not think about birthdays. Humans count everything because they are terrified of losing it. They count days, money, heartbeats, steps, years, and the hours until death. I spent only a tiny part of my existence as a human. 58 years, to be exact. That was the only life in which keeping track of time seemed important. Before that, I had been many things. Some lives were short. Some lasted only minutes. I was an insect that died before its wings fully opened. I was a fish swallowed by something larger. I was a rabbit that froze beneath a hedge during winter. I was a dog that lived beside a family for nearly 15 years and died with a little girl's hands wrapped around my neck. Other lives lasted longer. I was a sea turtle that crossed thousands of miles of ocean. I was a crow that watched generations of humans pass beneath the same tree. I was a dolphin that spent years traveling with the same group through warm water. Everybody taught me something. Still, out of all my lives, being a worm has been the best. Perhaps I should be more specific. Being a worm in a graveyard has been the best. The soil here is rich, dark, and soft. Rainwater collects beneath the grass. Roots grow around stone markers. Insects move through the ground like people walking through crowded streets. Above me, families come and go. They cry, speak softly, leave flowers, and then return to their lives. Below them, the dead wait. At first, I fed on the earth like any ordinary worm. I moved between roots and stones, eating soil and rotting plant matter. Then I found the coffins. The cheap ones were easiest. Wooden boxes weakened quickly beneath wet soil. Beetles and other insects chewed through them. Small cracks opened. Once the holes became wide enough, I slipped inside. The first body I entered had been buried for several months. The smell did not bother me. Worms do not experience disgust the way humans do. Rot is simply change. Flesh becomes food. Bodies return to the ground. I crawled through clothing, skin, and soft tissue. At first, I ate whatever was in front of me. Then, I reached the brain. The human brain is the most complex object on this planet. Humans know this, but they do not fully understand what that means. Memories do not disappear when the heart stops. They remain. They cling to the folds of the brain like flavor trapped inside fat. When I took my first bite, I did not simply taste flesh. I experienced a life. For 1 second, I was inside a kitchen I had never seen. A woman was laughing beside me. Sunlight came through a window. I knew that I loved her, though I did not know her name. Then I was standing in the rain at a funeral. Then I was a child hiding beneath a table. Then I was old, weak, and afraid. The memories came so quickly that I could not separate them. In a few seconds, I felt decades of happiness, shame, boredom, fear, hope, and regret. When the memory ended, I lay still inside the skull. I had never experienced anything like it. Other animals carried memories too, but their minds were simpler. I once ate the brain of a dead squirrel. I experienced the location of hidden acorns, the feeling of tree bark beneath claws, and a constant nervous fear of movement from above. It was interesting, but limited. Human minds were different. They were endless. During one of my lives as a dolphin, I sometimes came across toxic pufferfish. A few members of my group would bite them carefully. The poison made them slow, peaceful, and strange. Some dolphins became addicted to the feeling. They spent the rest of their lives searching for those fish. Eating a human brain was like that feeling multiplied 20 times. It was not only pleasure, it was experience. As a human, I had lived only one life. I had seen the world through one family, one body, and one set of eyes. As a worm, I could live an entire human lifetime in seconds. I could taste the first kiss, a childhood birthday, a terrible accident, an ordinary morning, and the final moment of death without ever leaving the grave. At first, every brain was enough. I did not care who the person had been. The memories themselves satisfied me. But like every addiction, the feeling became weaker over time. Ordinary lives stopped being interesting. A long marriage, a stable job, quiet children, and a peaceful death produced memories that felt thin. Pleasant, perhaps, but not powerful. I began searching for stronger flavors. Violent men, terrified children, lonely people, the broken, the guilty, and the cruel. Their memories had weight. Fear was sharp and electric. Shame was thick and bitter. Anger burned. Grief remained in the mouth long after the memory ended. The first time I ate the brain of a murderer, I lost control. I do not know how long I remained unconscious. Worms do not sleep the way humans do, but my mind vanished. When I became aware again, I was halfway through the man's occipital lobe, and I was crying. I did not think a worm could cry. There were no tears. I had no face capable of making them. Still, I felt myself sobbing. The man had killed someone he loved. He had done it in anger, then spent the rest of his life pretending he felt nothing. His grief had remained hidden beneath years of excuses. I felt all of it. Even now, I do not know whether the sorrow belonged to him or to me. That uncertainty should have frightened me. Instead, it made me want more. One grave belonged to a boy named Tanner Wilkins. He was 10 years old. Children usually have fewer memories than adults, but their feelings are often stronger. They have not yet learned how to hide pain from themselves. The moment I bit into Tanner's brain, I became him. A fist slammed into his ribs. I felt several bones crack. The pain was sudden and bright. Tanner cried out and stumbled across his bedroom. Colored blocks were scattered across the floor. He tried to reach the door. He was limping. He stretched for the handle, but he was too small. His fingers touched the metal without closing around it. He was trapped. Tanner turned. His father stood behind him. The man was huge from Tanner's point of view. His face was dark red. Veins pushed against his forehead. Foam had gathered at the corners of his mouth. "How many times, Tanner?" he screamed. "How many times have I told you to clean up your blocks?" Drops of spit struck the boy's face. Tanner wanted to speak. I felt the words trapped inside him. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to explain that he had planned to clean the room. He wanted to promise that he would never make his father angry again. More than anything, he wanted his father to love him. But fear had taken away his voice. Only broken sobs came out. Then the second blow landed. Tanner's jaw moved out of place. He fell to the floor, holding his face. His father continued hitting him. The pain lasted only a few seconds. Then, Tanner's life ended. That was his final memory. I remained inside his skull for a long time after the vision stopped. Part of me wanted to leave. Another part wanted to keep eating. I told myself that consuming the dead did not hurt them. Tanner was already gone. His father had already taken everything from him. But I knew that was not the truth. I was not honoring Tanner. I was using his pain. The more terrible the memory, the more I enjoyed it. Unmarked graves often produce the strongest experiences. People buried without names usually carried secrets. Their deaths were often connected to lies, crimes, shame, or violence. The longer a person had lived inside a chain of lies, the more anxiety remained in the brain. Anxiety tasted sweet. It was like candy. And I developed a sweet tooth. One unmarked grave belonged to a woman named Taylor Riggins. Taylor had once been a happy child. She grew up with kind parents in an ordinary home. Her early memories were full of family dinners, school trips, music, and summer afternoons. Happiness had a faint, salty taste. The happier the memory, the saltier it became. Too much happiness could ruin an experience. It was like eating a meal covered in salt. Taylor's happiness did not last. When she was 14, both of her parents died in a car accident. After that, her life collapsed. She went to live with her mother's sister, a woman who provided food and a room but little attention. Taylor could disappear for days without being questioned. She learned quickly that nobody was protecting her. By 16, she was using drugs. By 18, she had already outlived 2 pimps. The first died from an overdose. Taylor had convinced herself that they were in love. She knew he took her money, controlled her, and hurt her, but she still believed he cared. When she found his body, she held him and cried until her drug dealer arrived. The dealer gave her something to remove the pain. For a few hours, it worked. Taylor did not make the same mistake with the second man. She understood that their relationship was only business. When one of her clients shot him in an alley, She did not cry. I preferred her memories when she became attached. Love made the grief stronger. Her third pimp killed her. He had been awake for days, high on crack, and had fallen into a violent psychosis. He became convinced that Taylor was the devil. He beat her, stabbed her, and buried her where nobody would look. Her final thought was not about death. She wondered whether her parents would have recognized the person she had become. That memory stayed with me for days. Then I found another unmarked grave. Something about it felt different from the beginning. I entered through a jagged hole in the coffin. The wood had split near the top, leaving enough room for my body. The corpse inside was male. I pushed beneath the skin and moved through the decaying flesh. I expected another hidden life filled with crime or fear. Instead, I felt something pulling me toward the brain. It was almost like a smell, though worms do not smell in the human sense. The brain seemed to call to me. I followed the feeling the way a cartoon character follows the scent of a pie cooling on a windowsill. The closer I came, the more excited I felt. I squeezed between the bones of the neck and entered the skull. My mouth watered. This one was going to be powerful. I took the first bite. Memories exploded through me. They came too quickly to understand. I saw a fish swimming through dark water. Something large chased it from behind. The image vanished. I became a lion moving through tall grass, muscles low, waiting to attack. Then a bird fell from a cliff. Then an insect crawled beneath bark. Then a horse died in battle. Then a child drowned in a river. Thousands of years passed through my mind in seconds. Each memory belonged to a different body, a different species, a different age. I suddenly understood what I had found. This person had been like me. He had remembered. Through every reincarnation, his memories had remained. I was no longer eating one human life. I was consuming thousands of lives layered together. There was no slow beginning to the experience. No childhood, adulthood, and death. There was only raw emotion. Fear, hunger, pleasure, pain, love, instinct. If I had possessed lips, I would have smiled so widely that my face might have split. For the first time in all my lives, I had found proof that I was not alone. I should have stopped. I should have tried to understand who he had been. I should have wondered whether eating his brain might destroy something important. Instead, I took another bite. The next wave struck harder. I became a monkey fleeing through trees while a predator moved below. Then I was a mouse trapped beneath a house cat's paws. I felt teeth enter my stomach. I felt the cat release me, not to let me escape, but to catch me again. Then I was an old elephant standing beside the bones of another elephant. Then I was a starving wolf watching fire from the edge of a human camp. The emotions were pure. There was no distance between memory and reality. God, it felt good. The pleasure was so strong that I forgot the graveyard. I forgot the coffin. I forgot that I was a worm inside a rotting skull. I thought about stopping. In fact, I knew I had to stop. My body continued eating. After each bite, my awareness disappeared. When I returned, I felt dizzy and sick. My insides twisted. My mind struggled to understand what body it belonged to. Then I took another bite, and the sickness vanished beneath a new wave of pleasure. It became a cycle. Bite, memory, darkness, sickness, bite, pleasure. Each time, I promised myself the next bite would be the last. Each time, I lied. The memories grew less organized. I was no longer seeing clear lives. I became pieces of them. A wing breaking in a storm, a newborn opening its eyes, a spear entering a stomach, a mother licking blood from a dead cub, a soldier laughing beside a fire, a prisoner watching sunlight through bars, a whale calling into an empty ocean, a man kissing another man in secret, a woman leaving a baby on a church step, a king dying alone, a dog waiting beside a door for an owner who would never return. The experiences struck faster and faster. I lost the ability to decide where one life ended and another began. Still, I ate. The final bite was too much. The memories did not arrive as images. They broke through me like water through a destroyed dam. There were no separate scenes, no quiet moments between them. Everything came at once. Every death, every scream, every birth, every betrayal, every moment of pleasure, every wound, every breath, every rustle of grass beneath a million different winds. I stretched across the memories until I felt impossibly thin. Paper thin, then thinner than paper. Thin as a cell, thin as a single thread pulled across all of time. I burned from the inside. At the same moment, I froze. My senses collapsed. I could no longer tell which body was real. Was I a Roman soldier trapped inside a burning building? I felt smoke fill my lungs and fire climb my legs. Was I a deer being torn apart by wolves? I felt teeth enter my throat, while snow pressed against my side. Was I a woman dying during childbirth in the 12th century? I felt hands holding me down. I heard someone praying. I knew the baby had survived, but I would not. Was I a sailor drowning beneath black waves? Was I an insect crushed beneath a shoe? Was I a man falling from a tower? Was I still a worm? Was I still inside a decomposing skull, choking on the result of my own greed? I tried to move. I had no body. The worm was gone. The grave was gone. The earth, coffin, and corpse disappeared. I was dissolving into thought. I became part of the memories, and the memories became part of me. I could not remember which lives were mine. I had once believed I carried my own memories through reincarnation. Now I could not tell whether any memory had ever truly belonged to me. Perhaps identity had always been a lie. Maybe a soul was nothing more than a collection of experiences held together by the belief that they belonged to the same person. That belief was breaking. I felt someone else's shame, someone else's love, someone else's need to die. I felt the fear of creatures that had no words for fear. I felt the loneliness of people whose names had vanished from history. They spoke to me, but not with voices. They whispered through sensation. They did not want to be remembered. They did not want to be eaten. They did not want their most private pain used as entertainment by a creature hiding beneath the ground. I wanted to apologize. I no longer knew which thoughts were mine. I tried to pull away from them. There was nowhere to go. I had consumed them. Now they were consuming me. Tanner's fear returned. Taylor's regret followed. The murderer's grief rose beneath both. I felt every brain I had eaten, every life I had stolen for a few seconds of pleasure. I had told myself they were dead. I had told myself it did not matter. But memories are not empty. Memories are the shape a soul leaves behind. I had swallowed too many shapes. Now there was no room left for mine. Then everything became quiet. It was a silence deeper than death. It was not peaceful. It was not empty. It was absence. There was no body, no earth, no past, no future, no creature, no name. I do not know whether I still exist. I do not know whether the word I means anything anymore. Perhaps there was never a single person inside me. Maybe I was always only a pile of memories pretending to be a soul. Maybe reincarnation was not one being moving through many bodies. Maybe every life was only a container, and memory was the disease that convinced me I had survived. The last thing I remember clearly is the feeling of being full. Completely full. Not satisfied. Not happy. Full in the way a room is full when there is no space left to breathe. Then I felt nothing. Story 2. If you have ever been in a serious car crash, then you already know how strange time can become. The accident itself may last only a few seconds, but inside those seconds, everything slows down. Your mind begins to notice details that should be impossible to see. Every sound becomes clear. Every movement feels separate. For one brief moment, the world seems to stop and wait for you to understand what is about to happen. My moment was spent staring at the wooden utility pole directly in front of my car. I remember the headlights covering it in a pale yellow glow. I remember seeing old metal staples running up its side and a small warning sign nailed near the bottom. I even remember thinking that the pole looked stronger than my car. Then I hit it. There was a violent cracking sound as the front of the vehicle folded inward. Glass burst around me. The steering wheel slammed against my chest, and the seatbelt locked so tightly that I could not breathe. The utility pole bent. For half a second, I saw wires whipping through the darkness above me. Then, the car spun away from the road. The world became a storm of dirt, broken glass, and flashing headlights. My body was thrown from one side of the seat to the other. Something struck the roof. The passenger window shattered, and cold night air rushed inside. The vehicle rolled once, maybe twice. I cannot be sure. When everything finally stopped, the car was lying on its side in a ditch beside the highway. For several moments, I did not move. I remained suspended in the driver's seat with the seat belt cutting across my chest. My ears rang so loudly that I could not hear anything else. The smell of gasoline, burned rubber, and hot metal filled the vehicle. I tried to understand which direction was up. The driver's side door was above me. The passenger side was below. Broken glass covered what had once been the passenger window. My hands shook as I touched my face and neck. I expected to find blood everywhere, but my fingers came away mostly clean. There was a cut near my eyebrow, and my lip had split against my teeth, but nothing seemed immediately life-threatening. My chest hurt. My left shoulder burned where the seatbelt had caught me. Every part of my body felt bruised, but I could move. That was all that mattered. I reached for the seatbelt release. The moment I pressed it, gravity pulled me down. I fell across the car and landed hard against the passenger door. My elbow struck the dashboard, and pain shot through my arm. I groaned and remained there for a few seconds, breathing against the cold glass. I needed to get out. The smell of fuel was growing stronger. I moved carefully through the damaged interior. Loose objects had fallen everywhere. A bottle rolled near my hand. Pieces of paper and clothing covered the seats. The passenger window was almost completely gone. I kicked away the remaining pieces of glass and pushed myself through the opening. My jacket caught on a sharp edge. I pulled hard, heard the fabric tear, and fell into the wet grass outside. The cold air struck me immediately. I lay beside the overturned car, staring at the dark sky. There were no stars, only clouds. The highway was a few feet above the ditch. But the car had landed low enough that passing drivers would have trouble seeing it. An occasional set of headlights moved along the road, appearing for a few seconds before disappearing into the distance. No one stopped. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt weak, and the ground seemed to tilt beneath me. I placed one hand on the car until the dizziness passed. Then, I examined my body as well as I could. My clothes were torn in several places. Small cuts covered my hands. My knees and ribs hurt, but nothing appeared broken. The car and the utility pole seemed to have suffered most of the damage. I should have climbed toward the highway. I should have waved down a passing driver and asked for help. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But before I could move, I heard the buzzing. It began as a low vibration beneath the normal sounds of the night. At first, I thought it came from the damaged electrical wires. The utility pole had partly collapsed, and the power lines hung at strange angles above the ditch. Then, the sound grew louder. It did not crackle like electricity. It hummed. The noise seemed to move through the earth and into my bones. My teeth vibrated. The ground beneath my shoes felt as though something enormous was moving nearby. I turned slowly, searching the darkness. The buzzing continued to approach. It did not come from the highway. It came from somewhere above and behind me. My first thought was that a helicopter had seen the crash. Maybe someone had called emergency services. Maybe a rescue team was already searching. But there were no normal helicopter sounds. No heavy beating of blades. No distant engine. Only that deep, unnatural hum. I looked toward the road. Another car passed without slowing. Its headlights briefly illuminated the ditch, the broken utility pole, and the edge of the forest. That was when I saw the eyes. They appeared near the trees, about 30 yards from the highway. 2 points of light reflected in the darkness. They were low to the ground at first, then seemed to rise. I could not see the body around them, only the eyes. They stared directly at me. My heart began beating faster. It might have been an animal, a deer, perhaps, or a dog wandering near the road. But the eyes were too far apart, and they did not move like the eyes of a frightened animal. They watched. The buzzing became louder. Something inside me screamed that I had to leave. I did not stop to think. I ran toward the trees. Branches struck my face as I entered the forest. The ground was uneven, covered in roots, dead leaves, and thick brush. I stumbled several times, but managed to remain standing. Behind me, the buzzing followed. I did not know where I was. When I entered the car earlier that night, I had only known that I needed to get away. I had driven for hours without choosing a real destination. I had passed towns, gas stations, and highway signs without paying attention to their names. All I cared about was distance. I had needed to put as much space as possible between myself and what had happened. I had not stopped to rest. I had not eaten. I had barely slowed down. Looking back, exhaustion may have caused the accident. My eyes had been closing for several miles before the road suddenly curved. Maybe I should have pulled over. But stopping had not felt possible. Even before the crash, I felt as if something was following me. Now, I knew I had been right. I pushed through the forest. Thorns caught on my clothes and scratched my arms. Low branches struck my shoulders. Dead wood cracked beneath my shoes. The buzzing grew stronger with every step. Then, white light broke through the trees. Several beams moved between the branches above me. They were far brighter than flashlights. Each one cut through the darkness like a solid wall. I threw myself behind a tree as one beam crossed the ground near my feet. The light moved in a mechanical pattern, sweeping left and right. It was searching for me. I continued running whenever the light passed, then stopped whenever it came close again. The beams moved too quickly to belong to people walking through the forest. They came from above. Sometimes 3 or 4 appeared at once, crossing each other between the trees. The light made the forest look flat and colorless. Every trunk became pale. Every shadow became completely black. One beam passed over me. For a second, heat touched my back. I dropped to the ground and crawled beneath a fallen branch. The beam returned, moving over the place where I had been standing. It had almost found me. I forced myself up again and continued deeper into the woods. My lungs burned. Every breath tasted like dirt and blood. I was not sure how far I had gone when I saw the hollow tree. It was an old, rotting trunk, wide enough for most of my body to fit inside. A large opening had formed near the base where the wood had collapsed. I crawled toward it and squeezed into the darkness. The inside smelled of insects, mold, and wet bark. I pulled my legs close to my chest and remained still. The beams passed through the forest outside. One moved across the opening. I held my breath. The light remained there for several seconds. Then it drifted away. The buzzing continued above me, but it seemed uncertain now. The beams moved farther into the forest, searching the wrong area. For the first time since leaving the car, I allowed myself to breathe properly. My chest rose and fell in painful movements. Sweat covered my face despite the cold air. As I sat hidden inside the tree, doubt entered my mind. Was I overreacting? I had just survived a violent crash. My head had struck something inside the vehicle. It was possible that I was confused. Maybe the buzzing came from a helicopter. Maybe the beams belonged to emergency workers searching for the driver of the crashed car. Perhaps the eyes near the forest had only been a deer. If that was true, I was running away from the people trying to help me. But the idea did not feel right. The lights were too bright. They moved too smoothly. No one had called my name. No one had announced themselves. And that buzzing did not sound like any aircraft I had ever heard. It seemed alive. It seemed angry. I remembered the pair of eyes in the darkness. They had not looked like the eyes of an ordinary animal. My instincts told me that whatever searched above the trees was not there to help. I remained in the hollow trunk, trying to decide what to do. Then I heard another sound. It was quieter than the buzzing, but far more frightening. A growl. The sound came from somewhere behind me. Then another answered from the left. A third came from farther away. There were several creatures in the forest. Their growls were deep and aggressive. They moved quickly through the brush, snapping branches and disturbing the leaves. The lights had not lost me. They had sent something down to search. I crawled from the tree and began running again. The creatures immediately changed direction. Their growls followed. I heard claws or heavy feet striking the earth. Whatever they were, they moved much faster than I did. I forced myself between the trees, ignoring the pain in my ribs and legs. The lights found me again after less than a minute. A white beam struck the ground directly in front of me. I turned sharply and nearly collided with a tree. Another beam appeared on my right. The creatures continued approaching from behind. Their breathing was loud now. One of them barked. At least, It sounded almost like a bark, but the sound was too deep and violent. I ran harder. The forest began to thin. At first, I was relieved. Then I saw what lay ahead, an open field. There would be nowhere to hide. I reached the edge of the trees and stopped for half a second. The field stretched into darkness. Tall grass covered the ground. Far in the distance stood the outline of an old barn. The roof had partly collapsed. One side leaned inward. No lights shone from the building, and there were no roads or houses nearby. It was the only shelter I could see. A growl came from directly behind me. I ran into the field. The separate beams of light moved together. They crossed the grass, then joined into one large circle. The light surrounded me. It was as bright as daylight. I raised one hand to protect my eyes and continued running toward the barn. The heat from the beam covered my back. I imagined some enormous shape floating above the clouds. I imagined metal wings or a dark body hanging silently over the field. I did not look up. I knew that if I saw what was above me, I might lose the strength to continue. The growling creatures entered the field behind me. They were close enough that I could hear their breathing. The barn seemed impossibly far away. My legs became heavier with every step. My throat felt dry, and my lungs struggled to pull in enough air. I stumbled, caught myself, kept running. The barn slowly became clearer. Its wooden walls were gray and damaged. One of the doors hung partly open. Most of the roof remained, though a large section near the back had collapsed. I was close enough to reach it. Then I heard a sharp sound behind me. Zip, something struck my left knee. My leg collapsed beneath me. I fell forward into the grass. Pain exploded through my body. For several seconds, I could not breathe. I rolled onto my back and grabbed my knee. Blood poured through my fingers. The injury was too deep to have come from the fall. There was a hole near the front of my leg, and blood quickly soaked my pants. They had shot me. Whatever hunted me had weapons. The growls came closer. I could see dark shapes moving near the edge of the light, but I could not make out their bodies. I gritted my teeth and forced myself onto my right leg. The injured knee could not support weight. I half ran, half dragged myself toward the barn. More sharp sounds cut through the air. Zip, whiz, something struck the dirt on my right. Another shot passed close to my head. They were trying to stop me. I reached the barn door and threw myself through the opening. The inside was completely dark. I grabbed the hanging door and pulled it closed. The old hinges screamed, and the wood barely covered the entrance. I moved deeper inside. The barn was filled with broken tools, pieces of machinery, rotten hay, and objects I could not identify in the darkness. I stumbled over a metal bucket and nearly fell. The pain in my knee had become unbearable. Each movement sent fire through my leg. I found a dark corner behind several old wooden boards and a rusted machine. I dropped to the floor and pressed both hands against the wound. Blood continued leaking between my fingers. Outside, the creatures reached the barn. Their growls surrounded the building. They moved along the walls, sniffing and scratching. I tried not to breathe loudly. The buzzing remained overhead. Colored lights flashed through the cracks in the wood. Red, blue, white. They moved across the barn walls in quick patterns. The creatures made strange cries outside. Some sounded like barks. Others sounded almost like human voices. I knew they were trying to confuse me. The pain in my knee made me dizzy. I rested my head against the dirt floor and fought to remain conscious. The barn door moved. Something struck it from outside. Once, twice. The third hit tore it open. Bright light entered the barn. I covered my face. Several shapes rushed inside. The first creature reached me within seconds. It leapt over the broken boards and landed on my chest. Its weight forced the air from my lungs. Teeth sank into my arm. I screamed. Another creature bit my shoulder. I kicked and pushed, but I had no strength left. The attack was violent and fast. Teeth tore through my clothes and entered my skin. Claws scraped across the floor beside my face. I tried to protect my throat. The creatures growled and pulled at my arms. Then an enormous pressure held my body against the ground. The attack stopped as suddenly as it began. I heard voices. They came from every direction. The creatures had learned to speak. "Don't fucking move. Stay right where you are." The voice sounded human, but I knew better. Colored lights continued flashing through the barn. One of the creatures placed something around my bleeding leg, put a tourniquet on his leg, and start M's. He took a shot to the knee. The words were clear. Perfect. They had practiced human speech. I looked toward the shapes around me. At first, they appeared to be men wearing dark clothing. Several pointed long weapons in my direction. One held back a large animal with sharp teeth. But I understood the truth. The creatures could copy human forms. They could create uniforms, faces, and voices. They wanted me to believe they were police officers. One of them pushed my face into the dirt. "Stay where you are." I said, "Don't fucking move." I tried to tell them I knew what they were, my mouth filled with blood and soil. Another voice spoke from behind me. "I told you not to run or you'd get the dog." The creature near my arm growled. They believed they had fooled me. They believed I would accept their disguise. But I could still hear the buzzing above the barn. I could still see the unnatural lights. I knew no human rescue team could have found me so quickly. No human would have chased me through the forest with creatures and beams of light. They were not people. They only looked like people. They fastened metal restraints around my wrists and lifted me from the ground. I struggled. The pain in my knee almost made me lose consciousness, but I continued fighting. One of them shouted for me to stop. Another pressed me down again. I refused to surrender. I do not know where they have taken me now. The room appears to be a prison cell, but I know that cannot be true. The walls are white and smooth. There is a narrow bed, a metal toilet, and a door with a small window. The creatures bring me food. Sometimes they wear the faces of guards. Sometimes they wear the faces of doctors. They ask me questions about the house. They ask me about the family. They keep showing me photographs. A man, a woman, 2 children. They claim I killed them. That is another trick. They want me to doubt my own memory. I remember entering the house, but I did not hurt anyone. The creatures were already there. They had copied the family. Their eyes were wrong. Their voices were wrong. I did what I had to do. I escaped in the vehicle because more of them were coming. Now they are trying to convince me that I am a murderer. They want the world to believe I am dangerous, so no one will listen when I tell the truth. Whoever finds this account must understand what happened. The lights were real. The creatures were real. They followed me from that house. They brought down my car. They hunted me through the forest. They used animals to tear at my flesh. Now they keep me trapped behind these walls while pretending to be human. I will not stop fighting. I will escape. I will return to real people. They think their human faces have fooled me. They have not. The account above was the only full written statement ever produced by William Thomas. one of the most infamous killers in California history. On the evening of October 12, 2007, Thomas entered a family home in a quiet suburb outside Sacramento. There was no evidence that he knew the people living there. The family consisted of 42-year-old Daniel Mercer, his 39-year-old wife, Laura, and their two children, 11-year-old Matthew and 7-year-old Sophie. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting shortly after 9 in the evening. One neighbor said he saw a strange man walking around the Mercer property earlier that day. Another remembered hearing the family dog barking for nearly 20 minutes before suddenly becoming silent. At 9:34 p.m., Laura Mercer called emergency services. The call lasted only a few seconds. She whispered that a man had entered the house through the back door. Then, the line went dead. Police arrived 8 minutes later. All 4 members of the Mercer family were found dead inside. Investigators determined that several weapons from the home had been used during the attack. The family's dog was also killed. The violence of the crime shocked even experienced officers. The family vehicle, a dark sedan, was missing from the driveway. Traffic cameras recorded the car leaving the area shortly after the murders. William Thomas drove for several hours, crossing county lines and ignoring multiple attempts by police to stop him. Officers later stated that he appeared to be driving without a clear destination. At several points, the vehicle reached dangerous speeds. Shortly after 3 in the morning, Thomas lost control while turning onto a rural highway. The stolen car left the road, struck a utility pole, and rolled into a ditch. A passing driver saw the crash and contacted emergency services. When officers arrived, Thomas was no longer inside the vehicle. A police helicopter was called to assist in the search. Its spotlight located movement near the trees. Officers ordered Thomas to stop, but he ran deeper into the forest. Police dogs were brought in. For nearly 40 minutes, Thomas moved through the woods while the helicopter tracked him from above. He eventually left the tree line and crossed an open field toward an abandoned barn. Officers repeatedly ordered him to stop. Thomas did not respond. According to police reports, he turned toward the officers and reached inside his torn jacket. Believing he was reaching for a weapon, one officer fired. The bullet struck Thomas in the left knee. Even after being wounded, he continued into the barn. A police dog found him hiding behind broken equipment. Thomas fought the animal and the officers attempting to arrest him. He suffered several bites before being restrained. At the time of his arrest, he repeatedly screamed that the officers were not human. He accused them of changing their faces. He claimed the police helicopter was some kind of flying creature, and he described its spotlight as a weapon searching for him. He also believed the police dogs were intelligent beings pretending to be animals. Weeks after his arrest, Thomas wrote the account in his cell. It was found beneath his mattress during a routine inspection. His lawyers argued that the document proved he had been experiencing severe psychosis during the murders and the police chase. Medical experts examined him for several months. Some believed he suffered from paranoid delusions. Others argued that his symptoms were exaggerated or invented to avoid responsibility. Thomas was eventually found competent to stand trial. The prosecution presented physical evidence linking him to every victim. His fingerprints and blood were found throughout the Mercer home. Clothing taken from the scene contained traces of the family's blood. Several stolen objects were found inside the car he crashed. Witnesses identified him as the man seen near the house. The jury found him guilty of 4 counts of murder, burglary, vehicle theft, and several other crimes. He was sentenced to death. Even after the trial, Thomas continued to claim that the Mercer family had not been human. He insisted that he had saved others by killing them. He said the creatures in the house had been waiting for him, and that the entire police pursuit was part of a larger attempt to capture him. He never expressed regret. Supporters of the defense believed his writings showed that he had lost all connection with reality. They argued that a man who truly believed police officers were monsters could not fully understand his actions. Others saw the letter differently. They believed Thomas had created a story in which he became the victim. By turning helicopters into flying monsters, police dogs into creatures, and officers into shape-shifting enemies, he could avoid accepting what he had done. Unless the case is ever reopened, no one may fully understand what was happening inside William Thomas's mind on the night of October 12, 2007. Perhaps he was a deeply disturbed man trapped inside a terrifying delusion. Perhaps he was a cold-blooded killer trying to hide behind madness. Whatever the truth may be, 4 innocent people lost their lives that night. All anyone can hope now is that the surviving relatives of the Mercer family eventually found some measure of peace. As for William Thomas, he remained convinced until the end that the creatures were still watching him. According to a guard who worked near his cell, Thomas refused to sleep whenever a helicopter passed over the prison. He would stand beneath the small window, stare at the moving light in the sky, and whisper the same words again and again. They found me. Story 3. Deep inside a forest, far from the nearest town, and even farther from the main road, 7 friends set up their camp beneath a circle of tall trees. They called themselves the 7 Buddies. The name had started as a joke when they were teenagers. There was nothing creative about it, but it stayed with them through high school and into adulthood. Whenever all 7 of them managed to meet, someone would take a picture and post it with the same words beneath it. The 7 Buddies are together again. The group included Olivia, Tony, Liam, Oliver, Elijah, Mateo, and Sophie. Olivia was the natural leader. She was calm, organized, and usually the person who remembered to bring the things everyone else forgot. Tony was known for telling stories. He could turn a normal trip to the grocery store into an exciting adventure if people gave him enough time. Liam was cheerful, but not especially clever. Oliver teased him whenever he said something foolish, though the 2 of them were close friends. Elijah was the most energetic person in the group. He always wanted to explore one more trail or climb one more hill. Sophie rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. She carried a camera everywhere and took photographs of almost everything. Mateo was the quietest among them. He had been unable to speak since childhood. He could hear perfectly well, but he communicated through sign language, facial expressions, and messages typed on his phone. The others had known him for so long that they could understand many of his signs, even though Olivia was the only one who had seriously studied sign language. They had been camping together many times before. Most of their earlier trips had been to popular locations, with clean trails, marked camping areas, and other people nearby. This time, however, Elijah had found an unfamiliar forest on an old hiking website. The nearest legal place to leave their cars was beside a small road almost 5 kilometers away. From there, they had to carry their bags through the forest. The trail had been difficult to follow. Some of the painted marks on the trees were faded. Fallen branches covered parts of the path. and twice they had to stop while Olivia checked the map on her phone. There was almost no signal, but she had downloaded the area before leaving home. By the time they found a flat clearing, the sun was already beginning to sink behind the trees. They agreed to camp there. The clearing was not large, but it was wide enough for their tents. Thick trees surrounded it on every side. Their branches met high above the ground, forming a dark roof that blocked most of the evening sky. Sophie looked around before removing her backpack. "This place feels older than the other forests we've visited," she said. Oliver laughed. "It is older. That's how forests work." She ignored him and lifted her camera. The first photograph showed the clearing filled with orange evening light. The second came out much darker. Sophie frowned at the screen. "What?" Olivia asked. "Nothing. The camera probably changed its settings." They began setting up camp. Olivia and Sophie worked on one tent, while Elijah and Tony raised another. Liam tried to help Oliver, but somehow managed to bend one of the poles in the wrong direction. "Are you sure you've done this before?" Oliver asked. "I was supervising last time." "You were asleep last time." "That is one way of supervising." Mateo stood beside them and signed that Liam was making everything worse. Olivia translated. Liam placed one hand over his heart. "Even Mateo is attacking me now." Mateo smiled and continued helping Oliver with the tent. When darkness finally settled across the forest, they gathered around a campfire they had built in the center of the clearing. They arranged several fallen tree trunks in a rough circle and used them as seats. A pot of instant noodles hung over the flames. After hours of hiking, the smell was wonderful. Nobody spoke for a while. They listened to the fire crackling and the wind moving through the branches. Somewhere far away, an owl called into the night. The darkness beyond the fire was thick. Their flashlights could reach only a short distance into the trees. Beyond that, the forest became a solid black wall. Liam looked over his shoulder. "Is it just me, or is it too quiet?" "You just heard an owl," Oliver said. "I mean, other than that. It's a forest at night. What do you want, traffic?" Liam picked up a small branch and threw it at him. Oliver moved aside, and the branch disappeared beyond the firelight. A few seconds later, something snapped in the darkness. Everyone stopped talking. Elijah leaned forward. "Was that the branch?" "Probably," Tony said. Mateo was staring between two large trees. Olivia noticed. "What is it?" He signed slowly. He thought he had seen something move. Elijah lifted a flashlight and pointed it into the trees. The beam passed across roots, bushes, and rough bark. Nothing was there. "An animal," Oliver said. "Probably a deer." Mateo did not look convinced. Liam clapped his hands together. "I have an idea. How about we have a scary story contest?" Oliver groaned. "No, why not?" "Because you always tell terrible stories." "That isn't true. Tell us one good story you have told." Liam thought for several seconds. "I'm about to tell one." He sat straighter on the log and lowered his voice. One night there was a haunted house. He moved his hands through the air and made a long, ghostly sound. "Ooh," Oliver covered his face. Liam continued. "A little girl entered the house because she was curious. Then she became a ghost. Everyone waited. Liam smiled. The end." Oliver slowly lowered his hands. "That's it?" "Yeah, what do you think?" "There was no story. There was a haunted house and a ghost. A girl walked inside and became a ghost. You didn't even explain how. That's what makes it mysterious." Everyone laughed. Liam raised both hands. "Fine, I'm not good at making up stories." Olivia smiled at him. It was short, but at least you tried. It was not short, Oliver said. It was missing. After dinner, Tony can tell us a real one, Olivia suggested. Elijah immediately agreed. Tony's stories are always good. Tony rubbed his stomach. I don't mind, but the noodles are ready. I'm not telling anything until I eat. They filled their bowls and passed around bottles of water. Mateo sat beside Olivia, eating quietly while watching the trees. Once, Sophie noticed him turning his head sharply as if he had heard someone call him. She tapped his arm. Mateo shook his head and signed that it was nothing. When they finished eating, Elijah placed his empty bowl on the ground. All right, Tony, we're ready. Tony leaned closer to the fire. His face became serious. This story is based on a real incident, he said. At least, that is what the person who told it to me claimed. Oliver smiled. Where did you hear it? Online, then it must be true. Do you want to hear it or not? Oliver raised both hands and allowed him to continue. Tony looked around the circle. It happened to a group of campers much like us. There were 5 of them. They entered a forest through a trail that most local people avoided. The wind passed over the clearing. Flames bent toward Tony. There was an old wooden sign at the start of the path. Most of the writing had faded, but one sentence was still clear. What did it say? Liam asked. Count everyone who enters. Tony paused. The leader of the group had heard strange stories about the trail. Before they entered, he gave the others one important instruction. Every so often, they had to count themselves aloud. They also had to remain close to the person walking in front of them. Why? Elijah asked. Because people had disappeared on that trail before. Some were never found. Others returned days later and claimed they had been walking with people who were not part of their group. The friends grew quieter. Even Oliver was listening now. The 5 campers entered the forest, Tony continued. The trees were so large that they blocked most of the daylight. Even though it was still afternoon, the path looked as dark as evening. After walking for nearly half an hour, the leader stopped. Count, he told them. The campers counted one another. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everyone was present. They continued. A short time later, the camper at the back of the group said he needed to use the bathroom. He walked several steps away from the trail and disappeared behind the trees. The others waited. Minutes passed. The leader called his name. At last, the camper returned. He apologized and said he had become confused in the darkness. They began walking again. After another half hour, the leader ordered a second count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once again, the number was correct. They passed an old tree with a wooden sign nailed to it. The writing was almost gone, but the leader believed it marked the halfway point. The group continued deeper into the forest. The air became colder. The path narrowed. The trees grew so close together that their shoulders brushed the trunks as they passed. Then the leader called for a third count. The campers began. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A voice from the back said, 6. Everyone froze. Slowly, they turned around. The final camper was standing behind them, smiling, ha-ha. I got you, he said. You all looked terrified. The leader became angry. Do not joke about the count. The camper laughed and promised not to do it again. Soon, 3 members of the group complained that they were tired. They had planned to reach a lake before setting up camp, but the path seemed much longer than the map had shown. They found a small clearing surrounded by tall trees and decided to remain there for the night. They raised their tents and built a fire. Once they had eaten, one of them suggested telling ghost stories. "I know a good one," he said. The others gathered closer. "This story is about a ghost that likes playing games. Its favorite is called The Silent Game." Tony's voice became quieter. "The rules are simple. When the ghost closes its eyes, nobody is allowed to make a sound. Not a word, not a whisper, not even a breath loud enough for the ghost to hear." "What happens if someone makes noise?" Liam asked. "The ghost kills them." Tony slowly closed his eyes. For several seconds, he remained completely still. The 7 buddies watched him. The campfire snapped. Liam jumped. Tony opened his eyes again. In the story, the camper acted like the ghost. He closed his eyes and told everyone to stay silent. One of his friends laughed. "That's creepy. Nice acting." Then the storyteller's body jerked. His back bent so sharply that his head almost touched the ground behind him. His arms twisted in opposite directions. Before anyone could help, something invisible struck him. Blood sprayed across the fire. The other 4 campers screamed and ran. But the ghost was faster. One was pulled into the trees. Another was lifted into the air and broken apart. The third disappeared after shouting for help. The leader was the last one alive. He reached the trail and began running toward the entrance. As he ran, he heard footsteps behind him. He refused to look back. Then a voice whispered close to his ear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The leader turned. The camper who had gone to use the bathroom stood behind him. His face was pale, and his clothing was covered in dirt. The leader felt relief for 1 second. Then the camper smiled. His throat had been cut open. The truth was that the 5th camper had died when he left the path earlier that afternoon. Whatever returned to the group had only looked like him. And that, Tony said, was the 6th person they counted. For a moment, nobody spoke. The fire gave a low pop. Then the group began clapping. "That was good," Liam said. "Much better than mine." "Anything would be better than yours," Oliver replied. Liam pushed him. Oliver laughed and closed his eyes dramatically. He placed both hands on his knees and lowered his head, copying the ghost from Tony's story. Everyone became still. Olivia lifted a cup of water and threw it into his face. Oliver jumped up. "Hey, do not try to scare us with that terrible acting," Olivia said. Water dripped from his nose and chin. The others burst out laughing. At first, Mateo laughed with them. His laughter was louder than everyone else's. It continued after the others had stopped. The sound was deep and rough. Slowly, all 6 friends turned toward him. Mateo sat on the far side of the fire with his head lowered. His shoulders moved as he laughed. "That was a good idea," he said. His voice was low and unfamiliar. "How about we play the silent game for real?" Nobody moved. Mateo raised his head. The firelight reflected in his dark eyes. "I'll start." The smiles vanished from every face. Liam went pale. Oliver's mouth slowly fell open. Sophie dropped her camera into her lap. Because they all remembered the same impossible fact. Mateo could not speak. He had never spoken a single word in all the years they had known him. Olivia stood. "Mateo?" He tilted his head. The movement looked too slow and controlled. His mouth opened into a wide smile. "Quiet," he whispered. Then he closed his eyes. For several seconds, The clearing was completely silent. Nobody knew whether the game had truly started. Olivia raised one hand, signaling for everyone not to speak. She knew that what sat across from them might not be Mateo anymore. The fire cracked loudly. The figure did not move. Elijah slowly reached for his backpack. A flashlight was attached to one side. His fingers touched the plastic. It slipped from the strap. The flashlight struck the ground. The sound was small, but in the silence it seemed as loud as a gunshot. Mateo's head turned toward Elijah. His eyes remained closed. Elijah stopped breathing. A long black shape moved behind Mateo. At first, Olivia thought it was his shadow. Then it rose from the ground and stretched between the trees. It had arms that were too long and fingers that touched the leaves above them. The shape leaned toward Elijah. Olivia wanted to warn him, but she was afraid to make a sound. Elijah remained frozen beside his backpack. The shadow passed behind him. Nothing happened. After a few seconds, it returned to Mateo. His smile became wider. Sophie slowly lifted her camera. Olivia shook her head. Sophie pointed toward Mateo, and then toward the camera screen. She wanted to take a picture, perhaps to see something their eyes could not. Before Olivia could stop her, Sophie pressed the button. The camera clicked. Mateo's eyes opened. Sophie was lifted from the log. She rose several feet into the air with her arms pressed against her sides. Her mouth opened, but no scream came out. The black shadow wrapped around her body. There was a sharp crack. Sophie fell to the ground. Her camera landed beside her. The lens was broken. Liam covered his mouth with both hands. Oliver moved toward Sophie, but Olivia grabbed his arm. Sophie was still breathing. Her body had not been broken, but her head was turned toward the trees. She stared at something beyond the clearing with wide, terrified eyes. Mateo closed his eyes again. The game continued. Olivia pointed toward the tents. They had to leave, but their bags, phones, and supplies were spread around the camp. None of that mattered anymore. She signaled that they should move together toward the trail. The 6 friends rose slowly. Mateo remained seated by the fire. As Olivia took her first step, she noticed something carved into the tree behind him. The marks had not been there earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Beneath the 7th line was a fresh 8th mark. Olivia's stomach tightened. She looked around the group. Liam, Oliver, Tony, Elijah, Sophie, herself, and Mateo. 7 people. The 8th mark was longer than the others. They began moving toward the edge of the clearing. Each step had to be placed carefully. Dry leaves and branches covered the ground. Even the smallest sound might bring the shadow back. Liam walked behind Olivia. Oliver supported Sophie, who seemed barely able to stand. Tony and Elijah followed them. Mateo remained beside the fire. When they reached the trees, Olivia looked back. His eyes were still closed. His smile had disappeared. For one moment, he looked like their friend again. Then his hands began moving. He was signing. Olivia watched closely. "It is behind you." She turned. A black figure stood among the trees. It had no face. Its body was tall and thin, formed from darkness that seemed deeper than the night around it. Its long arms hung almost to the ground. The creature raised one finger to its mouth. Liam gasped. The shadow moved. Olivia shoved him aside as one long arm swept through the place where his head had been. The hand struck a tree, tearing away a section of bark. Everyone ran. Silence was no longer possible. Branches snapped beneath their feet. Tony shouted for them to stay together. Oliver struggled to keep Sophie upright. Behind them, Mateo began laughing again. The laughter followed through the forest. "Count!" Olivia shouted. "What?" Elijah yelled. "Count everyone." They ran through the dark, each calling a number. 1, Olivia shouted. 2, Liam replied. 3, Oliver yelled. 4, Sophie managed weakly. 5, Tony called. 6, Elijah shouted. There was a pause. Then Mateo's voice came from behind them. 7, a second voice whispered from the trees. 8, the group ran faster. Olivia pulled out her phone and opened the map, but the screen showed only a spinning symbol. Their location moved in circles, even though they were running in a straight line. The trail should have been nearby. Instead, the forest seemed endless. "Did we pass this tree before?" Oliver asked. Olivia looked at the trunk beside them. A faded wooden sign had been nailed to it. The same kind of sign Tony had described in his story. Most of the words had disappeared. Only one sentence remained. "Count everyone who leaves." Tony stopped. "I made that part up." Olivia stared at him. "What?" "The sign. The counting. Most of the story was mine. I made it up." A branch snapped behind them. They continued moving. "Where did you hear the part about the silent game?" Olivia asked. Tony's face was pale. "I don't remember." The trail appeared ahead. Everyone rushed toward it. The path seemed clearer than before, a narrow strip of dirt running through the trees. Olivia recognized one of the painted marks on a nearby trunk. "This is it," she said. "Follow me." They moved quickly, but remained close together. Behind them, footsteps matched their pace. Olivia did not turn around. After several minutes, Mateo's voice spoke from the rear of the group. "Olivia," she kept walking. "Olivia, please." The voice sounded different now. It was not deep or cruel. It sounded weak. Frightened, Mateo had never spoken. Yet somehow Olivia knew this was truly him. "Don't turn around," Tony warned. Mateo began crying. "I can't see." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She had spent years speaking for Mateo when strangers did not understand his signs. He was like a brother to her. Leaving him behind felt impossible. "I'm scared," he said. Liam started to turn. Olivia grabbed his shoulder. "No, but what if it's him? It isn't. How do you know?" Olivia did not answer. The voice behind them became angry. "You left me." The footsteps grew heavier. "You brought me here, and you left me." The creature was getting closer. Olivia pointed ahead. A faint light showed through the trees. The road. They were almost out. "Count." She called. They began again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Mateo said from behind them. 8, whispered the forest. The light ahead disappeared. They found themselves back at the campsite. The tents stood exactly as they had left them. The fire still burned. Mateo sat on the log with his eyes closed. Nobody understood how they had returned. Sophie began sobbing. Oliver held her closer. "We can't get out," Liam whispered. Mateo opened his eyes. "You broke the rules," he said. Olivia stepped forward. "What do you want?" The creature wearing Mateo's face smiled. "Another game." The shadow rose behind him again. "Count correctly," he continued, "and one of you may leave." The friends looked at one another. Mateo pointed toward Olivia. "Start," she swallowed. 1, Liam spoke next. 2, Oliver said. 3, Sophie whispered. 4, Tony said. 5, Elijah looked toward Mateo. 6, Mateo smiled. 7, the shadow leaned over the fire. A voice came from inside it. 8, there are only 7 of us, Olivia said. Mateo's smile disappeared. There were 7 when you entered. The fire went out. Darkness covered the clearing. Something moved among them. People screamed. A hand grabbed Olivia's arm. She could not tell whose hand it was. Someone fell. Branches broke. Tony shouted Elijah's name. Then everything became silent. The fire returned. Olivia found herself sitting alone on one of the logs. 6 empty places surrounded the flames. She looked toward the tents. No one was there. Liam? Nothing answered. Oliver? Her voice shook. Tony? Elijah? Sophie? The forest remained silent. Then someone sat beside her. Mateo. He looked normal again. His eyes were filled with tears. He raised his hands and signed quickly. Olivia struggled to understand through her fear. It made me watch. What happened to the others? She asked. Mateo pointed toward the trees. Olivia heard voices in the darkness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they were counting. The voices belonged to her missing friends. Mateo signed again. We must not answer. The counting began once more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a long pause followed. The darkness waited for the 7th voice. Olivia covered her mouth. Mateo closed his eyes. They sat beside the fire without making a sound. The voices repeated the count again and again. Hours seemed to pass. Sometimes the voices begged Olivia for help. Sometimes they cried. Liam told her he was cold. Sophie said something was standing behind her. Oliver screamed that his legs were broken. Olivia did not answer. Mateo did not open his eyes. At last, pale light appeared between the trees. The voices stopped. Birds began singing. The forest looked normal again. Mateo opened his eyes. The fire had burned down to gray ash. Their friends were still gone. Olivia and Mateo followed the trail toward the road. They counted each other every few minutes without speaking. Olivia raised 1 finger. Mateo raised 2. They reached the cars shortly after sunrise. Police searched the forest for several days. They found the campsite, the tents, the abandoned food, and Sophie's broken camera. There was no sign of Liam, Oliver, Tony, Elijah, or Sophie. The final photograph on the camera showed the 7 friends sitting around the campfire. At first, the police saw nothing unusual. Then Olivia looked more closely. A tall black figure stood behind Mateo. One hand rested on his shoulder. The other was raised toward the camera. It had 8 long fingers. Mateo never spoke again after that night. But sometimes, when Olivia visited him, he would stare over her shoulder and begin counting with his hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then he would raise 1 extra finger and silently begin to cry. Story 4. The baby had been completely unexpected. Melissa had never believed that one short night with a man she barely knew could change the rest of her life. Yet there she was, standing alone in the narrow bathroom of her apartment, staring down at a small plastic pregnancy test held between her shaking fingers. 2 clear lines appeared in the result window. Positive, for several seconds, Melissa could not breathe. Her first feeling was shock. It struck her so suddenly that the cramped bathroom seemed to tilt around her. Then, despair followed, heavy and cold, opening like a deep hole inside her stomach and swallowing any happiness she might have felt. A baby. There was a baby growing inside her. She slowly lowered the test and placed one hand against her stomach. It was still flat. Nothing about her body looked different yet. But somewhere beneath her skin, a new life had already begun forming. Melissa turned toward the stained mirror above the sink. She looked pale. Her honey-colored hair hung loosely around her face, and dark shadows rested under her eyes from another week of long shifts at the grocery store. She could not raise a child, not alone. Her apartment was small, damp, and badly maintained. The kitchen tap leaked day and night, creating a steady dripping sound that she had learned to ignore. Dust gathered in the corners no matter how often she cleaned, and thick cobwebs clung to the ceiling above the hallway. The bedroom was hardly large enough for her own things. There was no space for a crib, baby clothes, or toys. Her job barely paid enough to cover rent, food, and electricity. Some months, she had to choose which bill could wait until the next paycheck. How could she possibly care for a newborn? The thought of ending the pregnancy came to her, but it brought a fresh wave of pain. She did not know whether she could do that either. The life inside her had not asked to exist, and it was not responsible for the situation she had created. Melissa leaned against the sink, her knees weak. She needed help. In a frightened daze, she reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she searched for the number she had saved only a few weeks earlier. Albert, the baby's father. They had met by chance during a clear, beautiful night. Melissa had gone out alone after work because she did not feel ready to return to her empty apartment. She had walked through a small outdoor market where music played beneath strings of warm lights. Albert had approached her near a stall selling old books. He was handsome in an unusual, old-fashioned way. His clothes were neat, his dark hair carefully combed, and his voice calm and educated. He spoke with a confidence that made Melissa feel noticed in a way she had not felt for years. They spent the evening talking. The sky above them was filled with stars, and the moon had cast a pale glow across Albert's face. Melissa was not usually the type of person to go home with someone she had just met. That night, however, she did. It had felt almost dreamlike, as though the moon itself had placed the desire inside her. She had believed they were careful. She had believed she was protected. But against all expectations, her body had chosen to carry a child. The morning sickness had started several days earlier. At first, Melissa blamed cheap food from the grocery store. Then, she noticed how tired she had become and how different her body felt. She purchased the pregnancy test only to prove that she was being foolish. Instead, it had confirmed her worst fear. Melissa pressed the call button. The phone rang several times before Albert answered. Hello? His voice was quiet and impatient. Melissa hesitated. Did she really expect him to care? Perhaps she had meant nothing to him. A brief attraction that had already faded. Why would he take responsibility for a child created during one accidental night? She almost ended the call. Hello? Albert repeated. She could hear irritation in his voice. Albert? She finally managed. It's Melissa. His tone changed immediately. Melissa? I was wondering who this was. I only gave you my number, didn't I? Yes, she placed her free hand against her stomach again. There's something I need to tell you. The line became quiet. Melissa could hear his breathing. For one strange moment, she had the feeling that he already knew what she was about to say. She imagined him ending the call, blocking her number, and disappearing forever. She closed her eyes. I'm pregnant. Silence followed. Then Albert drew in a sharp breath. Pregnant? He repeated. Yes, Melissa waited for anger, disbelief, or denial. Instead, Albert sounded almost excited. That's wonderful news. Melissa opened her eyes. It is? Of course it is, he replied with a cheerful laugh. I was rather hoping this might happen. Her fingers tightened around the phone. You were? Indeed, his reaction was so different from what she had expected that it frightened her almost as much as the pregnancy itself. Albert sounded pleased, not merely accepting. Pleased, but I can't do this alone, Melissa said. I don't have enough money. My apartment isn't suitable for a child, and my job, if money is your concern, you don't need to worry. Albert interrupted gently. In fact, I have the perfect solution. Melissa frowned. His words sounded prepared, as though he had been waiting for this exact conversation. What solution? You will leave your apartment and come live with me in Duskvale. Melissa leaned harder against the cold bathroom wall. Live with you? Yes, I will provide everything you need. You will be comfortable here, and so will our child. Duskvale was the small town Albert came from. He had mentioned it during their night together, but Melissa knew almost nothing about it. Would that be a problem? He asked. I don't know. Albert had been sweet and charming. She had not regretted spending the night with him. But moving into his home, after knowing him for such a short time, seemed far too fast. It also felt as if he had planned it before she even called. That was impossible, of course. How could he have known she would become pregnant? You won't need to work, Albert continued. You can rest and prepare for the birth. I'll take care of you. Melissa looked around her bathroom. The dripping sink, the cracked tiles, the weak yellow light. She imagined raising a baby there and felt sick with fear. Maybe Albert's offer was a gift. Even if they did not remain together forever, living with him would give the baby a safe beginning. She could make other plans after the birth. I suppose I could come, she said quietly. Perfect, Albert replied. I'll make the arrangements immediately. This child will have a very bright future. I'm sure of it. The call ended before Melissa could ask what he meant. A heavy silence filled the bathroom. She remained there for a long time, staring at the phone. Move to Duskvale. Live with Albert. Trust a man she hardly knew. It felt dangerous, but so did staying where she was. In the end, Melissa told herself she was doing it for the baby. A few weeks later, she packed everything she owned into several bags and moved to Duskvale. The town was small and surrounded by dark forests and rolling hills. Even during the day, a gloomy atmosphere seemed to hang over it. Many of the buildings were made from dark wood or gray stone, with steep roofs and narrow windows. A cemetery stood near the center of town. In the middle of it rose a tall, unusual structure that looked like a stone tower or a narrow church. Its pointed roof could be seen from almost anywhere in Duskvale. Albert told Melissa it was an old crypt belonging to the town's founders. Despite the gloomy appearance of the place, the people were extremely friendly. They welcomed Melissa as though they had been expecting her. Neighbors stopped to introduce themselves. Shopkeepers gave her discounts. Strangers smiled at her stomach, even though the pregnancy was not yet visible. No one treated her like an outsider. At first, Melissa found the attention comforting. Albert's home stood near the edge of town. It was a grand, old-fashioned manor, built from dark stone bricks covered in ivy. The house had tall windows, heavy wooden doors, and more rooms than Melissa could count. Behind it was a large garden filled with flowers, trimmed hedges, and stone paths. Beyond the garden lay a clear lake surrounded by reeds and trees. The house felt too large and quiet when she first entered. Several rooms were empty. White sheets covered furniture that had not been used for years. Dust gathered on shelves in parts of the manor where Albert rarely went. But Melissa could easily imagine the house changing after the baby arrived. The empty rooms would fill with laughter. toys would spread across the floors. The silence would disappear. The first months of Melissa's pregnancy passed peacefully. Her stomach slowly grew beneath the loose dresses she wore. Albert cared for her constantly. He prepared meals, bought vitamins, and hired someone to handle the cleaning so Melissa would not have to strain herself. Whenever she wanted something, he provided it. She did not return to work. For the first time in years, Melissa was free to rest. The townspeople also showed great interest in the pregnancy. Women brought fresh bread, pies, soups, and small handmade blankets. Men congratulated Albert whenever they saw him in the street. Everyone wanted to know when the baby was due. They were especially interested in whether it would be a boy or a girl. Melissa had not found out yet. She told people she did not care. She would love the child either way. The townspeople often smiled at that answer, though some of their smiles looked forced. Melissa spent many afternoons walking around Duskvale. She visited the small shops, sat in the public gardens, and wandered beside the lake behind Albert's house. Her favorite place was a wooden bench near the water. She would sit there for hours, watching fish move beneath the surface. Birds landed in the reeds and hunted insects along the shore. Sometimes Melissa brought crumbs and seeds, hoping the sparrows and finches would come close. They never did. The birds gathered at a distance, but refused to approach her. As the weeks passed, Melissa noticed something strange about Duskvale. There were far more men and boys than women. At first, she believed she was imagining it. Then, she began watching more carefully. Groups of school children often walked past Albert's house in the afternoon. Melissa never saw a girl among them. The children in the parks were boys. The babies being pushed in carriages were boys. There were women in town, but almost every one of them had moved there from somewhere else after marrying a local man. Melissa could not find a single woman who claimed to have been born in Duskvale. She considered asking Albert about it, but always changed her mind. Perhaps girls were born less often there by coincidence. Perhaps most young women left as soon as they were old enough because there were not enough opportunities. Maybe the school she saw was only for boys. There had to be a reasonable explanation. The women living in Duskvale seemed happy. They smiled, baked food, cared for their homes, and spoke kindly about their husbands. No one warned Melissa that she was in danger. The town treated her well. Why would she damage her new life by asking uncomfortable questions? She pushed the concern aside. As her due date approached, Melissa became more excited. She spent hours preparing a nursery in one of the rooms near the master bedroom. Albert bought a beautiful wooden crib, soft blankets, and shelves filled with toys. Melissa often stood in the doorway, imagining herself holding the baby. One evening, Albert returned home and wrapped his arms around her from behind. He placed both hands on her stomach. The baby moved beneath his palms. "I think it's time we found out the gender," he said. Melissa smiled. "I've been wondering when you would ask." A few days later, Albert arranged an appointment with the town's obstetrician, Dr. Edwards. The doctor was a short, heavy man with a thin gray mustache and thick eyebrows. He greeted Melissa politely, though something about him made her uncomfortable. His smile never reached his eyes. Albert remained beside her while a nurse took blood and prepared her for the ultrasound. Melissa lay back on the medical table and lifted her shirt. Dr. Edwards spread cold gel across her stomach. She laughed nervously at the uncomfortable feeling, but neither Albert nor the doctor laughed with her. Albert held her hand tightly. His expression was serious. The doctor moved the probe over her belly while watching the monitor. Melissa followed his gaze. The image was gray and unclear, but she could still see the shape of her unborn baby. Her heart warmed. The baby moved slightly. Melissa felt a gentle kick. She squeezed Albert's hand. Dr. Edwards continued examining the screen. His face remained unreadable. Albert looked calm, but Melissa noticed tension around his mouth. Was he nervous? Did he want a son? They had never discussed it. Melissa knew she would be happy either way, but she suddenly wondered whether Albert felt the same. Finally, Dr. Edwards put down the probe. He turned toward them. "It's a girl," he said. Melissa gasped with joy. Tears immediately filled her eyes. "A girl?" "Yes," she turned toward Albert. Something dark passed across his face. It disappeared so quickly that Melissa thought she might have imagined it. "A girl," Albert repeated. Then he smiled. "How lovely." "Isn't it?" Melissa said. "I can't wait to meet her." Dr. Edwards cleared his throat. He began wiping the gel from Melissa's stomach. "I assume you will be having a natural birth." Melissa looked at him. "What do you mean?" Albert shifted beside her, but said nothing. "Some women prefer a cesarean section," the doctor explained, "but I strongly recommend avoiding that unless absolutely necessary. A natural birth is always best in cases like yours." Melissa frowned. "In cases like mine? Healthy pregnancies," he replied quickly. "There is no reason for surgery if the body can handle the birth naturally." Oh, Melissa had not thought much about how she would deliver the baby. "If that's what you recommend, I suppose I'll follow your advice." Dr. Edwards exchanged a brief glance with Albert. It lasted only a second, but Melissa noticed it. "Your due date is less than a month away," the doctor said. "Rest as much as possible. Labor may be difficult." He removed his gloves and dropped them into a bin, making it clear that the appointment was over. Albert helped Melissa sit up. She felt slightly dizzy. Outside the clinic, she breathed deeply and tried to forget the doctor's strange behavior. "A girl," she said again, smiling at Albert. "Yes," he replied, "a girl." The news spread through Duskvale quickly. People began congratulating Melissa before she had told them herself. Most of the younger men appeared pleased. Several older residents, however, looked at her with expressions that seemed almost sympathetic. An elderly woman touched Melissa's arm in the market and whispered, "I'm sorry." Melissa stared at her. "Sorry about what?" The woman walked away without answering. Melissa told Albert about it that evening. He laughed softly and said older people in Duskvale believed many foolish superstitions. She wanted to believe him. Still, the lack of young girls in town became harder to ignore. When Melissa looked from the upper windows of the manor, she imagined her daughter running through the garden with her hair tied into pigtails. She imagined teaching her to feed the fish and helping her pick flowers. Then she wondered why she had never seen another little girl doing those things. A faint sense of dread began following her through the final weeks of pregnancy. Whenever it grew too strong, she reminded herself that Albert knew the town better than anyone. If there were a danger to their daughter, he would tell her. He loved the baby, didn't he? Near the end of the month, Melissa woke before dawn with a sharp pain tightening across her stomach. She sat up, breathing heavily. Another pain came a few minutes later. She reached toward Albert and shook him. "I think the baby is coming." He sat up immediately. There was no panic in his expression. Within minutes, he was dressed and helping her into the car. Dr. Edwards was already waiting when they arrived at the clinic. That struck Melissa as strange. Albert had not called him during the drive, yet the doctors stood near the entrance in medical clothing as though he had known exactly when she would come. Two smiling midwives placed Melissa in a wheelchair and took her into a delivery room. They helped her change into a medical gown and connected her to several machines. The contractions became stronger. Melissa gripped the sides of the bed as pain moved through her body. The fluorescent lights above her were painfully bright. The hard bed hurt her back, and the steady beeping from the heart monitor made it difficult to think. Albert stood beside her at first. He held her hand and told her she was doing well. Then one of the midwives entered carrying a large needle. "This may hurt," she said. Melissa turned her head toward Albert, frightened. The needle entered her spine. Pain flashed through her body. She cried out and reached for Albert. He was gone. Melissa looked around the room. Where did he go? The midwife did not answer. The door opened. Dr. Edwards entered wearing gloves, a mask, and a clear plastic apron. Even with most of his face covered, Melissa could tell he was smiling. "It's time," he said. The birth was long and painful. Melissa pushed whenever the doctor commanded her to. Sweat soaked her hair and face. Tears ran down her cheeks. Her thoughts became confused. "Yes, doctor," Edwards muttered while working. "Natural is always best." Melissa groaned. "Why do you keep saying that?" The doctor looked at her as though the answer were obvious. Because sometimes it happens so quickly that there is a danger of it falling back inside an open surgical incision. That would make things difficult for everyone. Melissa stared at him. What would fall back inside? He did not answer. Another contraction tore through her. She screamed and pushed. After what felt like hours, the doctor told her the baby was almost there. One more time. Melissa used every remaining piece of strength. She felt the baby leave her body. Then, silence filled the room. Melissa waited for crying. There was none. The heart monitor continued beeping. Dr. Edwards lifted the baby and wrapped her in a white towel. Something was wrong. Melissa knew it before she saw the doctor's face. "Why isn't she crying?" she asked. The doctor moved quickly toward her. "Look at her," he said urgently. "Look carefully. Remember every detail. This will be your only chance." Melissa's heart seemed to stop. "What do you mean?" "Doctor," Edwards held the baby near her. Melissa saw a perfect round face, a tiny nose, and pink skin covered with blood and pieces of birth tissue. The baby's eyes were closed. She was completely still. Melissa began shaking. No, then she noticed a faint movement in the child's chest. The baby was breathing. "She's alive," Melissa whispered. She reached forward. Her fingertips nearly touched the baby's cheek. The child turned to ash. There was no warning. Her skin, flesh, and bones broke apart instantly. The body collapsed inward, becoming a cloud of gray dust inside the towel. Within seconds, nothing remained except a small pile of ash in Dr. Edwards' hands. Melissa screamed. The sound tore through her throat until it hurt. She tried to climb from the bed, reaching for the ashes. The midwife rushed back into the room carrying another needle. Melissa fought, but her weakened body could not resist. The needle entered her arm. A cold sedative moved through her veins. Her screams became slower. The room blurred. The final thing she saw was Dr. Edwards folding the towel around the ashes. Then, darkness took her. When Melissa woke, the room was dim. Her mind felt thick and slow from the medication. For a moment, she could not remember whether she had given birth. Then she touched her stomach. It was flat. "My baby," she whispered. A lamp switched on beside the bed. Albert stepped out of the shadows. He touched her forehead with one cool hand. "Hush," he said. Melissa turned toward him. Her body felt empty, as though someone had removed an important part of her and left only the pain behind. "Where is she?" Albert dragged a chair beside the bed and sat down. He sighed. "She's gone." Melissa began crying. "What do you mean, gone? Where did you take her?" "Melissa, bring her back." "Please," I saw her breathing. Albert looked toward the dark wall. "It's this town," he said quietly. "Duskvale is cursed." Melissa stared at him. A cold feeling spread through her chest. She had known something was wrong. She had felt it from the moment she arrived. "Cursed?" "Centuries ago, witches lived here," Albert explained. "They were cruel women who used male babies in their rituals. They burned the children as sacrifices." Melissa continued crying. She barely understood his words. "The witches were eventually caught and executed," Albert went on. "But before they died, they placed a curse on the bloodlines of Duskvale. Male children survive. Female children do not. Any girl born from the blood of the town's original families turns to ash soon after birth." Melissa shook her head. "No, it has happened many times. My baby, I know. This is difficult." "You knew," Melissa whispered. Albert did not answer immediately. "You knew this could happen." He lowered his eyes. "This town is ruled by a group called the Patriarchy," he said. "Only certain men are selected to join them. I was not chosen, but every man descended from Duskvale's first families has responsibilities." Melissa stared at him through tears. "What responsibilities?" Albert rested his chin against his hands. "This is how we break the curse. The ashes must be collected." The room seemed to become colder. "Collected for what?" He hesitated. "This is the only way our town can continue. We need women from outside Duskvale to carry our children. If the child is male, he survives and continues the bloodline. If the child is female, her ashes help pay the debt created by the witches." Melissa's expression became empty. He had used her. Their meeting had not been an accident. His happiness when she called had not been love or surprise. It had all been planned. "This is just the way it had to be," Albert said. "As a descendant of Duskvale, I had no choice." Melissa turned away from him. "I hope you can forgive me." She whispered something into the pillow. Albert could not hear whether she said "my baby" or something else. "You should rest," he told her. "There is something I must do." He touched her forehead again. Melissa pulled away. Albert left the room. In the hallway, he adjusted his clothes and returned his face to its usual calm expression. Then he went to find Dr. Edwards. The doctor sat in his office reading documents. He looked up when Albert knocked. "You've come for the ashes?" "Yes, doctor." Edwards stood and picked up a small ceramic pot from his desk. He placed it in Albert's hands. "Here you are. I'll watch Melissa while you are gone." Albert held the pot against his chest and left the clinic. The sun was setting over Duskvale. The sky had turned deep red, and the rooftops glowed beneath the fading light. Albert walked toward the cemetery. People noticed the pot in his hands. Some lowered their heads. Others gave him sympathetic looks. Many had completed the same duty before. The tall structure in the center of the cemetery rose above the graves. Albert had told Melissa that it was a crypt. It was actually a temple. By the time he reached it, night had almost fallen. Albert stopped outside the heavy wooden doors and took a deep breath. Then he entered. The air inside smelled stale and damp. Torches burned along the walls, casting restless shadows across the stone floor. At the center of the chamber stood a wide stone basin. Albert approached it. A large mound of ashes filled the basin. In the weak light, it looked like a pool of black dust. According to the stories, Duskvale's curse would end once enough ashes had been gathered to repay the crimes of the past. Albert raised the ceramic pot. As custom required, he apologized aloud. "I am sorry, Melissa," he said. "You were needed. If she had given birth to a son, he would have raised the child with her. The boy would have continued Albert's family line. But she had delivered a girl. The rules were different. Every man must fulfill his duty to preserve the lineage." Albert tipped the pot. His daughter's ashes fell into the basin. Much later that night, 7 men approached the temple. They wore dark ritual robes and walked beneath the narrow moon. One by one, they entered the chamber. They passed the basin and gathered around the far wall. The oldest man reached toward one stone hidden among the others. When he pressed it, the brick moved inward with a click. The entire wall began shifting. Stones turned and pulled away from each other until a hidden chamber appeared. Inside stood a large statue. It had the body of a strange god. Its face had no eyes, only a wide, open mouth. 5 hands crossed over its chest, and stone tentacles covered the lower half of its body. The 7 men returned to the basin. The elder raised his hands. "We offer these ashes, taken from many short and innocent lives, to you, mighty one. Grant us your favor." The torches became still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The elder pulled several folded papers from his robe. Each piece contained a man's name and a number. He placed the first paper on top of the ashes. The other men began chanting. The ashes moved. At first, they trembled slightly. Then something pushed upward from beneath them. A pale hand appeared. Fingers reached through the dust. An arm followed. Slowly, a naked man dragged himself out of the basin. He looked confused and weak. One of the robed men helped him step onto the floor. The elder placed another paper into the basin. The ashes shifted again. Another man emerged. He was older, with gray hair and deep lines across his face. The number written beside his name was 58. One by one, the elder placed the papers into the ashes. Each name brought back a dead man. The number represented the age and identity he would carry in his restored body. With every rebirth, the mound of ashes became smaller. The price was different for each man. Those who had returned many times required more ashes than those being restored for the first time. Soon the naked men outnumbered the robed ones. They ranged from young to ancient. All stood silently beneath the eyeless statue. At last, the patriarchy was complete. Even its founder had returned. The people of Duskvale believed witches had cursed the town. That story had always been a lie. The founder himself had created the ritual centuries earlier. He had studied dark magic and made a bargain with the being beneath the temple. The basin allowed him and his chosen followers to return from death again and again. Their immortality required innocent ashes. The newborn girls of Duskvale had never been victims of a curse. They were sacrifices. The founder spread his arms. "We have returned to mortal flesh once more. Let us welcome this night with new skin." He walked toward the doors, The others followed. The founder grabbed the golden handle. The door did not open. He pulled harder. It remained shut. "What is this?" he demanded. The elder stepped forward. "What is wrong, master?" "The door is locked." The elder tried the handle. It would not move. "How is that possible?" He turned toward the others. Only 6 robed men remained. One had disappeared during the ritual. There was a traitor among them. Outside the temple, the missing member of the patriarchy stood with the people of Duskvale. Men and women had gathered in a wide circle around the building. The temple key hung from the traitor's hand. He had told everyone the truth. The ashes were not being collected to end a curse. They were used to restore the dead leaders of the patriarchy. The witches had never created Duskvale's suffering. The founder had. The townspeople had come to take revenge. Melissa stood among them. She had escaped the clinic after overhearing Dr. Edwards speaking with the traitor. Once she learned the truth, her grief changed into rage. Her daughter had not been taken by an ancient curse. Albert, Dr. Edwards, and the patriarchy had murdered her. Melissa held a container of gasoline. Others carried similar containers. Several people held burning torches. "There will be no more returning from the dead," one woman shouted. She threw gasoline across the temple walls. The others joined her. Melissa emptied her container against the dark stone. The sharp smell filled the air. When the walls were soaked, the people carrying torches stepped forward. They threw the flames. Fire spread instantly. It raced across the gasoline and surrounded the temple in bright, violent flames. The stone began cracking from the heat. Inside, the trapped men screamed. The people of Duskvale stood back and watched. Melissa heard voices begging for help. She heard the patriarch shouting orders. Then, beneath the screams, she heard something else. The distant crying of a baby. Melissa pressed both hands against her chest. Smoke covered the cemetery. Large pieces of burning stone broke away and crashed among the graves. Dark bodies appeared briefly through gaps in the flames. Then the roof began collapsing. The screams became weaker. At last, they stopped. The crowd stood in silence as the temple fell apart. The fire continued burning through the ruins. And then, after sleeping for centuries, I felt the night air against my skin. It was hot and filled with sulfur. I rose from beneath the broken temple. Stone, smoke, and burned bodies fell from my form as I stretched above the rooftops of Duskvale. My eyeless face looked down upon the people. 5 great hands moved across my chest. My tentacles uncoiled from the ruins. The flames crawled across my body, but they could not harm me. With a movement of my hands, I smothered the fire. Darkness returned. For centuries, I had slept beneath the temple. The robed men fed me ashes, innocence, and desperate human desire. In return, I allowed their leaders to rise again. I had not expected the common people to destroy them. The change interested me. The residents of Duskvale stared up in horror. Some dropped to their knees. Even the traitor had never seen my real form. He knew only the weak statue created in my image. "If you wish to change the way things are," I told them, my voice rolling across the town like thunder, "then offer me a new agreement." The crowd trembled. Most lowered their faces. No one spoke. I wondered whether they had the courage to create anything different. Then Melissa stepped forward. She was afraid, but her grief was stronger than her fear. She looked up at me. "I have a proposal." "Speak, mortal," I said. "What do you want? Should male children turn to ash instead?" Melissa shook her head. "Simple revenge is not enough. Her fists were clenched beside her body. I could taste the anger in her blood. It was sharp, bitter, and powerful. I listened as she described the new agreement. The ritual would now require 2 lives instead of 1. The father would die soon after conception. The child would also die at birth. Gender would no longer matter. Every baby would emerge dry and mummified, its unused life returning strength and youth to the mother who carried it. The women of Duskvalo would never need sons or husbands again. Their bodies would remain young. Their lives would continue without end. The men had used women as vessels to preserve their own immortality. Now the women would use men and unborn children to create theirs. I accepted the bargain. From that night onward, the fathers of Duskvale began disappearing. Some died in their sleep. Others collapsed after returning home from secret affairs. Women from distant towns continued arriving in Duskvale, drawn there by charming men and promises of beautiful lives. But the men never survived long enough to meet their children. And when the babies came, they were born small, silent, and wrapped in ancient skin. The mothers rose from their beds younger than before. Their wrinkles vanished. Their gray hair darkened. Their tired bodies became strong again. Melissa was the first. She carried another child less than a year after losing her daughter. The father died the morning after conception. When the baby was born, it did not cry. It came from her body as a dry, mummified thing no larger than a doll. As the midwife placed it beside her, Melissa felt warmth spread through her blood. Her skin tightened. Her strength returned.